Hello and welcome to week 16 of Organization Leadership and Decision Making. Given this is a 16-week course, guess what? We're on the last week. Moving into our agenda, first we'll start with a discussion of the assignments and we'll talk about some reading out of the text. First, your assignment this week is about reflexive thinking. So we will cover information about thinking back on the course. There is no reading this week. However, I will be covering a chapter that is in your text if you are so inclined. This is a shortened week, so you want to get your discussions in sooner than later. And basically, by the end of the course, you're going to have a week you're going to have reflected over this course. So week 16's discussion centers on reflecting back over this course material in your own words, and certainly you don't need citations or references for your opinion in this case, but what other topics would you have liked to have discovered in this course? So what did we not talk about that you really wish we would have? Of those things we talked about, what was in your reading especially, what was the more interesting that we talked about? Has any of this had a change in your perspective or outlook moving forward? And are there any other topics that you feel like you would like to add? So any other discussions and so on. Moving on to the reading. And again, this is bonus material out of Organizational Leadership, John Bratton, and it's out of part 4, Contemporary Leadership, and chapter 15, which is around leadership in public sector organizations. After completing this chapter, you should be able to explain the particular challenges of leadership in complex public sector organizations and why there has been an increased interest in strengthening public leadership. Explain how new theories of leadership have informed approaches to public sector leadership. Engage critically with important themes in leadership in the public sector, from support from transformational leadership view under new public management to more recent developments in shared or distributed leadership and co-producted services. So for those of you who may not, public sector is around basically working for the government. So it's a unique set of environments with unique sort of leadership requirements. Public sector organizations are organizations involved in the delivery of public goods and/or services, having a degree of local, regional, and central government control over their corporate policy or strategy. Just as I mentioned on the previous slide, basically it's working for something that it's essentially an organization associated with and typically controlled by or funded by the government. Focus has always been on transformational leadership. However, there are tensions associated with it when leading public organizations. This connects with the critique of new public management inspired leadership strategies that the transfer of private sector management best practices to the public sector, a key tenet of new public management, can be problematic. Perhaps shared or distributed leadership could potentially be the one that is more appropriate to apply in this context. So what's the best approach of taking the best approaches from other forms of leadership and applying them to public sector? Distinct challenges associated with public sector leadership. They need to lead across and within multiple professional hierarchies and groupings. They are required to respond to the demands of multiple principals, funders, political leaders, and service users, to name just a few, and to deliver according to complex and varying performance criteria. The room for maneuver is therefore limited. Multiple audits, performance regimens, and high levels of formalized constraints on their authority. Their work is characterized by goal complexity and ambiguity. In a public sector position, sometimes it's very challenging to get rid of a problematic employee. So firing someone may not be an option. Motivating them may also be a challenge because they have job security. So it is very challenging from a leadership perspective. They are increasingly required to navigate inter-organizational hierarchies and multiple agencies working together on complex policy problems, so that organizational factors external to their own team may yet impact its performance. They may lead on the design and delivery of services that rely upon co-production with service users, so that success will be defined by whether they and their team can secure the buy-in and support of relevant sectors in the public. So it's not only that they may be leading their own team, they may be trying to find a way to encourage the public sector, the people that they're actually trying to serve, to engage and do their part in something where they're being co-produced. They lack the lack of autonomy to set priorities and allocate resources, plus diverting away from leading subordinates towards managing relationships with external actors, generating external support for the agency, and obtaining vital information and resources limited by previous factors listed. So in general, lots of challenging things associated with leading in public sectors. The new Labor government, 97 to 2010, saw the strong leadership as a scarce resource, and series of reports argued for the need to invest in and drive up the quality of public leadership under successive governments since the end of the new labor era, and among policymakers in developed and local governments, leadership development has remained a key priority. New public management refers to the organizational reform movement that has informed changes to public sector organizations. Many of the actions that have sought to promote leadership development and capacity in the public sector from the 1990s onwards have clearly been informed by thinking around the value of entrepreneurship and transformational approaches to leadership. Transformational leadership in the public sector are seen as proving meaning and sense of purpose for employees and modeling pro-social behaviors. Bach and Kessler, an emphasis in 2012, an emphasis on team working reflected a shift away from new public management emphasis on heroic individual leadership towards a more distributed form of leadership involving staff across an organization. Why is there a change? Organizations are far less interested in romanticizing leaders since the global finance crisis, which was seen to be particularly contributed by a failure of corporate leadership. And beyond transformational leadership, shared and distributed leadership. There is a rise in challenging public sector environments where interagency networks are required to solve complex, wicked problems that cannot be solved by transformational leadership. Collaborative leadership organizations to reduce conflict helps organizations to reduce conflict and facilitates employees' involvement, foster commitment to new initiatives, and accomplish a shared purpose. Some additional challenges in distributed leadership in public sector organizations is many barriers were reported to exert coercive action and co-joint agency, including a sense that more junior leaders were not heard by senior management, top-down policy and management prescriptives that were seen as impossible to change, and power inequalities according to the level of seniority or clinically versus non-clinically clinical expertise. Systematic barriers in terms of limited resources, meaning that staff struggle to find time to adopt leadership roles along their day-to-day work responsibilities, professional democratization, and silo working that limited interprofessional collaboration, and the scale of organizational structures, which created practical difficulties in bringing people together to share ideas and creating opportunities for senior leaders to engage with staff at other levels. Not every part of the community is willing to take part, and it is easy to influence them to do so. And it isn't easy to influence them to do so. Although Boyne and Daya have demonstrated a performance bounce within public organizations appointing new chief executives, they also acknowledge that this may be because leadership changes are used to bring about broader reform programs, as outsiders are more likely to implement strategic change. There is limited consistent evidence of individual leaders or even approaches to leadership as encompassing best practice in delivering improved performance in some of the sectors that we have discussed above, such as education and healthcare. As Spicker notes in 2012, given the complexity of public sector organizational and inter-organizational environments, there is little evidence that leadership must be concentrated among special people. There is no standard of skill, behavior, or roles which is generally applicable to positions of responsibility throughout public services. Moving on to chapter 16, again, bonus content, leading pro-environmental change. And this is very relevant in today's environment. After reading this chapter, you should be able to explain the nature of environmental sustainability and the role of the workplace, both as a significant contributor to carbon emissions and as a site for implementing environmental improvements. Explain the role of organizational leadership in influencing environmental sustainability and critically analyze change management strategies. You should also be able to explain how learning and development is connected to change management strategies and explain the meaning of employee voice and how it contributes to environmental sustainability in the workplace. So the nature of environmental sustainability, the UN World Commission of Environmental and Development, WCED, defined sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Sustainability is living within the regenerative capacity of the biosphere. Environmental management is an attempt to control the human impact on and interaction with the natural environment in order to preserve natural resources. Corporate environmental performance includes both environmental outcomes and the pro-environmental initiatives that organizations implement. The former represent the ecological impact on footprint of organizational activities. The latter focuses on what organizations do for environmental sustainability. Employs pro-environmental behavior and environmental management systems. It is to the workplace that one must look to examine how managers work and workers' behaviors and own goals combine to create a more environmentally sustainable workplace. Employs pro-environmental behaviors. Ones and Dilrit define it as scalable actions and behaviors that employees engage in that are linked and contribute to or detract from environmental sustainability. It focuses within the organization at individual level and excludes those in employees' own lifestyles. All types of voluntary or prescribed activity undertaken by individuals at work that aim to protect the natural environment or improve organizational practices in this area. It also refers to management of an organization's environmental impact and in a comprehensive, systematic, planned, and documented manner. Environmental leadership is defined by Urgi and Herman as the ability to influence individuals and mobilize organizations to realize a vision of long-term ecological sustainability. Portugal and Ockel and Robertson and Barling defined it as a process to create a shared vision of environmental sustainability and motivate others to create sustainable organizations in an equitable manner while living within the limits of the ecosystem. Reframing organizational culture, a pattern of shared basic assumptions learned by a group as it adapts to the challenges posed by human activity's impact on natural environment in a way that permits day-to-day functioning, which has worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore to be taught to the new members as the correct way to perceive, think, and feel in relation to environmental sustainability. There are three main strategies of planned culture change. They are leadership processes that create the motivation to change behavior with a particular emphasis on their symbiotic content, reframing social networks of symbols and meanings through artifact, language, ritual, and ceremonies, initiatives of new human resource practices to change work conduct, and then a process model of strategic change. Figure 16.1 is essentially that, a strategy for creating sustainable workplace. And this is kind of a conceptual model. You start with establishing a sense of urgency, you move on to developing a vision and a strategy, you reframe social networks and meaning, which means that you're building high levels of effective commitment and shared values. Then you move on to creating a coalition of empowered action, and then you develop new HR policies. creating a sustainable workplace through HR practices. Serial evidence suggests that when pro-environmental HR policies and practices are embedded into the organization's architecture, they improve environmental sustainability. Bratton and Bratton in 2015 defined a low carbon work system, LCWS, as a planned approach to organizational design, culture, and human resource practices that deliver low carbon outcomes in the workplace, as well as to align the organization and its processes to achieve motivation and sustainable high quality results for the organization, workforce, and customers. Low carbon behaviors occur at three levels, and that behavioral interventions tend to be most successful when all three dimensions are considered holistically. Individual level influences act on individual motivators, basically personal rewards. Social level influences act on employees when operating in teams or groups. Social norms, shared understanding of communities and communities of practice, and material level influences act on organizational structure and processes. These are products, technologies, and environments. Recruitment and selection, pro-environmental training and learning, rewarding pro-environmental behaviors, and performance management and appraisal. Table 16.1 is the different concepts of involvement and participation. Elements within management include decision-making, level of commitment, competence, forms of consultation, strategy for innovation and change, and views on employees' roles and workplace changes. Employee involvement is around management initiated with control and controlled. It's limited to assignments and functions, individuals only, and management through goals and vision, and employees as important production factors. Employee participation dialects between top-down and bottom-up managerial tasks allocated to workers, involves high-level decisions, collective and individual representation, dialogue and cooperation, and employees as political actors. Critical perspectives on corporate-oriented sustainability. The term sustainability has become a purposeful distraction and is not defined properly. The role of the state in environmental management discourse should not be downplayed or ignored, meaning basically the federal or state governments should have a role. There is a need to recognize bottom-up stakeholder-centric input at the workplace. And with that, we've reached the end of this discussion and of the course. It's been a pleasure to be your instructor. As always, stay safe, and I wish you well in your future endeavors.